If you've watched any of our videos or familiar with any accounting concepts, you might have heard things like variable costs, fixed costs, overheads, direct costs. Well, in today's video, I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective on how our expenses or how our costs grow in our business, but what's the best way to approach them from a management perspective to control and manage those costs. One of the things I like to do is not just break down expenses between direct and overhead. So quick refresher, a direct expense is an expense that is directly related to the delivery of your product, whatever your product is. It's the people who make it, it's the people who deliver it, it's the freight to get the product in, it's the freight to get the product out. And it is also, if it is a tangible product, it is the tangible product itself. At a very simple level, those are direct expenses. And then overheads are all the associated expenses of running the business, whether that's sales team, whether that's rent of an office, whether that's telephone, whether that's motor vehicles that are used for sales processes, computer expenses, etc., etc. So they're the differences there. But what about the concept of linear versus stepped? So linear expense is when there's an expense that has a direct correlation to the more output we do, it increases at the exact same rate at what our revenue increases. So for example, the physical materials that go into our product is the first one that comes to our mind. Is that the more that we sell or the less that we sell will dictate how much materials get consumed in our process. But there's a whole bunch of other expenses that will move in a linear fashion in relation to our revenue. A couple of day-to-day examples will help hit this point home. Think about merchant fees. They are in the news a lot. They're an incremental transactional fee every single time that you either buy something as a consumer or you sell something as a business. Therefore, a merchant fee, if you're running your business charging a merchant fee, that is most likely going to be a linear expense. The more that you sell, the greater the probability that you're going to be incurring extra merchant fees as a result of that extra revenue. So it's going to go up linear. Another example might be waste removal. The more work you do, the more likely you're going to have more waste, whether that's scrap bits of metal or material that you don't need, offcuts, etc., etc. That rubbish removal will increase in relation to the amount of revenue that we do. So think of those expenses as linear. Stepped expenses are a little bit different. Think of a full-time employee or your office rent. Now you're suddenly not just going to have, oh, we did a little bit less work today, so we're not going to pay so much office rent today. No, you've got to pay the same amount of office rent regardless of how much or how little work you did. But at some point during your growth journey, hopefully you outgrow that office space or that factory space. So the expense doesn't just go from, say, $5,000, $10,000 a month, it goes to $15,000, $20,000 a month. So rather than being a linear increase as our revenue increases, it becomes stepped. You're at this level for a period of time, and then it steps up to a new level. Same thing with a full-time employee. A full-time employee, you're going to max out that person hopefully at some point, not because of their capability, but because of their capacity. They can only do so much in a day. What happens? You employ the second person. So the cost of your labor goes from there, stepped up to a new level, and then stays there. What's the purpose between breaking up linear expenses versus stepped expenses? It's the psychology of how they're managed. The psychology of how they're managed is with a linear expense, you want to slow down the gradient. So what do I mean by that? If our revenue, and forgive me using my hands, goes up like this, but the linear expenses go up like this, clearly our expenses are growing at a greater rate than what our revenue is. Our goal should be, if our revenue is going up like this, the linear expenses should be increasing at that rate relative to the revenue increase. What does that mean? We're going to be more profitable. Coming back to our examples, what's a way that we can buy our materials cheaper while still maintaining or exceeding quality? What are the different paths we can do to reduce our costs associated with those items? What about stepped expenses? How do we judge our performance on stepped expenses? I would look at how do we optimize the return on all of our stepped expenses before we need to make the next one. Now that might need some planning, and highly likely it will. For example, you don't want to just rock up one day and go, my factory is too small. You need to foresee those elements, but you also at the same time want to make sure your factory, your current one, is set up in the most efficient manner possible so that you can optimize your return and stay in that factory for as long as possible. Same thing with people. You're naturally going to grow your people base as your business grows, but at the same time, you want to optimize the return on each of those individuals so you can get the best return on investment as your team grows. That's today's video. Understand, is that expense a linear expense? And how do I slow down the gradient and the rate of expense of those items? And then what is a stepped expense? How do I optimize my return on investment before outlaying for a new investment in that space?